Hello everybody, welcome back to the Educatedcollins Snap channel. How you doing? Today we're going to be talking about Miss Marvel. It just came out very recently. We have some thoughts on it, some build ideas, some synergies, some counterplays, lots of stuff to get you ready for this new season. Hope you guys enjoy it, and let's get started. Hello, we're talking about Miss Marvel, of course. You've read the title. But yeah, Miss Marvel is a 4 energy, 5 power card. It's not horrible, but not like super good base energy cost. But with the ongoing ability, adjacent locations where your cards have unique costs have +5 power. So definitely a weird ability, like in terms of like understanding it at first look, right? Like it's like, what does it mean with unique costs, adjacent locations, but essentially you play this card where it's played does not get any power increase, but the locations next to it, which basically means you want to play it in the middle, right? But essentially you play this in the middle and the left and the right locations will get +5 power if you don't have unique costs. Now what does that mean? It means essentially you have to have you need to not have cards of the same ability cost in those lanes for it to work. So if you have no cards in there, I believe it works. If you have one card in there, it'll always work. But if you have 2 or more, then you have to make sure they're not both 1 drops, they're not both 2 drops, they're not both 3 drops, anything like that. Now, another thing to note is it only turns off that one location if you do have an issue. So let's say you have 2 1 drops in the left lane. Only that left lane will turn off. You'll still have the power in the right lane. Now, with the same thing, you can put anything in the middle lane. Most likely is where you're going to be playing this. You can put anything in the lane you play Miss Marvel in. So you can have 3, 4 drops in the middle lane. That's absolutely fine. It doesn't matter. So as long as you can fit those criteria, then this is essentially a 415, which is insane stat line. So the payoff is decent. Even one being inactive turns it into a 410, which isn't that bad as well. So I will say there's definitely some potential for this card. It does have this kind of restrictive nature to it, and it is a little bit like confusing to play, and it's not a card that easily fits into any previous deck, which has been a new criteria I've been using to good success. Like, can I play this card into an existing deck and it's just still good, so fantastic? I'd say that's kind of difficult because of how constrictive her ability ends up being, I think, in game. So it's not like, hey, just put this in a random, like, I think best case scenario is like a random ongoing deck or a random Zabu deck, and it's just going to work fine. Maybe it is, but you still have to play differently because it's in your deck. So definitely a unique card. This is a season pass. When it comes to recommending or not, I'm going to say overall, you are not that's how I feel every time. You are not the father, but I would not recommend this card. Now, I don't think this card is bad. So hear me out, right? So I do think that you can build a good deck with it, and it's a card that can win you games. However, there are a lot of constraints with it, which is why overall I would say, unless you like deck building or you like playing ongoing decks or anything like that, there's a lot of difficulties that you might be theoretically, right? Like, I haven't actually played the card. It came out like a couple of minutes ago, but theoretically you have to build around it, right? It's not a card you can just put it in every single deck and it works, right? When you play it, it limits your play patterns, right? So because you've played this in the middle lane, right, and you play like a 5 on the left lane, well, you can't play another 5 there. If you've played like a 1 drop in any of your left or right lanes, that means you can't play another 1 drop there, or you're gonna lose power. If you play a 2 drop, right, it pretty much limits what play patterns you can do. It also has a lot of counters. We're going to talk about the synergies and the counters. I didn't really even talk about the synergies in the beginning, but we'll get to it. And then it's also going to have a difficult Annihilus matchup. So Annihilus is coming out this month as well, and that will give your opponent all your useless cards, right? All your very low power cards. So it's very easy to just shut down a lane with that. Now, obviously, you can play with that in mind, right? So it's not like horrible, but it's going to make this deck build more difficult to navigate, right? And it's already a somewhat difficult to navigate card. And then another thing is the strategy is a little bit telegraphed. If they know you're playing Miss Marvel, like you've played this deck before and they're fronting you again, well, they kind of know what lanes you're going to fight for, right? You're going to fight for the middle lane or you're going to fight for one of the left or right lanes, right? So they can already start moving their pieces to kind of deal with that. And if this is popular or if this is strong, the issue is like if this is strong, you can super counter this. You really can make this card feel horrible, feel actively bad if you want. So, and another thing with cards like this is that when it goes wrong, you lose 4 to 8 cubes, right? Like those type of decks I don't love because you have to be thinking about that aspect of the game, especially if you're trying to climb, right? Like when things go bad, if they like last turn rogue you, right? Like that's you're gonna lose 4 cubes, you know, essentially. You're gonna lose 8 cubes. If they last turn enchantress you, if they mess with your strategy, like that could be a really difficult game to win. So you have to be aware of that, and that's kind of why I overall don't recommend the card. I think there's a lot of like issues with it. I think it's a fun card, and there's definitely going to be people that win with it. There's definitely going to be people that like playtesting and building decks around it. But as a general like advice, I guess, for like, hey, do I need to spend my $10 this month? Is this season pass really core? I wouldn't necessarily say it is. Now, you know, fun is relative. If you like the card, feel free. But as a like, hey, I need this, or am I losing? I don't think you need this or you're losing or anything like that. Now let's go to some of the synergies. So I do have a couple. Right, Zabu, right? It's a 4-drop, so Zabu always works. Invisible Woman, I think, is really nice because you can kind of protect Miss Marvel from Rogue, from Enchantress if you just play the Invisible Woman in the middle lane. I do think it's a little bit telegraphed in a lot of cases. Like if this is popular, like hey, there's an Invisible Woman in the middle lane, like so that you have to be a little bit careful. But I do think we have said this type of thing before where it's like, oh, Invisible Woman's telegraphed, and then people just play like hella discard anyways, and then it's like not an issue. So I still think Invisible Woman is still pretty solid. Same vein, Cosmo means they can't rogue you, they can't enchantress you easily, that kind of thing. Echo, well, you could play Echo and then use that as a way of dealing with some counter ongoings, but that's more of a counter tool. But it's still there. Doctor Doom I like because it hits all the lanes, and the boom bots are also 6-drops, so it's not an issue in terms of having unique costs. They're all going to be 6-drops, so it's perfectly fine. Good finishing card. Mystique, great if you can copy it and it makes sense, right? It's a 10-power Mystique, really solid. Onslaught is a very common, very popular answer, just double the ability, right? You get 20 power, seems solid as well. And then something I thought about while I was researching is cards like Carnage and Venom can be really nice. Venom in particular. Carnage, not so much, but same idea. But Venom, right? Let's say you have an issue and you have multiple of the same card in a lane. This could be a very strategic way of tricking your opponent, and they think it's not going to work, but then you Venom last turn, and boom, you absorb all that power, and then you just have that 3 cost on the lane. And then bam, it activates again. You get the extra 10 power. That could definitely catch people off guard. So maybe a destroy that could work with Miss Marvel if you're using, Venom and other destroy mechanics in such a way. So I do think that is an interesting avenue of building around Miss Marvel, just putting things like Venom in there just to have a way of just like solving that problem if it does show up. So I thought that was a good idea. Now that's some of the synergies that I thought about, but let's look at some of the counters, right? This is some of the reasons why I don't recommend it. Right, I have a list of some counters, just a little bit, just a small list of stuff that you could do. Obviously, Rogue Enchantress, I think those are going to be two major things you have to be watching out on. Echo, I don't think that many people play Echo, so I honestly don't think that's an issue. But you could just turn one Echo middle lane, right? And it's just like, okay, well, yeah, like that plan is off. So there's a big like issue there if you just go like turn one Echo, like okay, well, GG, right? So I do think Echo isn't that popular. Obviously, it depends on how strong the Sons of Being. Maybe Echo is now a new good answer. Then you have things like Juggernaut, you have things like Polaris, you have things like Arrow, you have things like Spider-Man, you have things like Magneto. So these cards just move your cards, right? If you move Miss Marvel, that's pretty bad. Spider-Man can do that, Juggernaut can do that. Arrow, most likely won't be in the right cost unless you're playing Electro and then you Arrow on 4 or something like that. Magneto as well, right? Just easily moves. So that's a pretty big issue, right? Especially if you're doing Onslaught stuff and they just Magneto your Miss Marvel and then your Onslaught's kind of dead. So that is notable, right? Like once again, this determines on how much you see this card, especially day one. Day one, it makes sense to just play this, just hate the card because people are gonna be playing it. But even later on, it's gonna really depend on how strong people it ends up being, how often you see people playing this. But the fact that there's these easy counters is pretty annoying. Things like Debris, right? You just summon 2 rocks. Those are going to shut down any 1-drops in those other 2 lanes. So if you're playing something like Nebula, which I think is a good card to play in a Miss Marvel deck, since you can just play in his skills, and if they want to deal with your other lanes, you have to put some resources into that Nebula lane. But yeah, Debris can shut that off. Viper, same deal, right? You can give them a 2-drop, give them a 1-drop, turn that off that way. Nihilus, of course, will be a problem once it comes out. But for now, just like Loki, it's not an issue. But once it comes out, then we'll have to see. And then, of course, you still have things like the Green Goblins, the Hobgoblins, right? To turn off the 3-drops, turn off the 5-drop. And then Super Scroll, right? Super Scroll is a great answer, right? They play Miss Marvel, you play Super Scroll, you're like, hey. And the thing about that is most Miss Marvel decks will have multiple ongoing. So this Super Scroll will do a lot of work for you. I think like probably one of the best cards to just put in your deck right now. Probably. This is all theoretical, right? I'm just saying. Just cause like if you find a Miss Marvel deck, hey, you're gonna steal everything. You could steal their Miss Marvel Iron Man Onslaught. Like just like that, right? Like and just like thank you for the win. Like I just played 1 card. So there's definitely some counters to this, and you can start to see why I'm more apprehensive of like saying, oh, you have to get this. I really don't feel like it's that important, but obviously things could change, blah blah blah. But there's just a lot of counters, right? Like there's a lot of problems. So yeah, let's get into some of the decks because I did build some decks. Now I will say none of them are tested, right? And so who's to say it's good? I wouldn't personally say that, but it's more of like here are some ideas to kind of, get your creative juices flowing. So I'm not going to say, hey, these are good. I'm just saying, hey, these are some builds you can try and see if you like them or not, or if they give you a different idea of how to build around. So first off, we do have just like a lockdown ongoing deck, right? You have Miss Marvel, you have Professor X. Claw, I think, will be very good in Miss Marvel since it kind of does what Miss Marvel wants you to do, right? Play a card, fits another line. Mr. Fantastic, if you like to do that. Electro lets you get the onslaught early, and then you can like follow up with like a Mystique or something if you want to do that, or you could go Electro to Professor X into Claw into Onslaught. That's a fantastic kind of turn to play. So kind of like a ramp lockdown with Miss Marvel as an other tool. You don't necessarily need Miss Marvel, which I think is optimal, but it's a good tool that can definitely get you far. So that's an idea just to work it. Next up is kind of some very similar. This one doesn't use Electro, but does use Storm. Storm being kind of good since Your Miss Marvel gives you reach. What are the benefits of Miss Marvel? 5 power reach is very notable, right? Doctor Doom level reach. So if you can get that to go off, right, you can play Storm, get that to do whatever you like. And then you have some of like late game control tools, Doctor Doom doing a lot of work, Alive if you want to play that. You also have the Echo yourself here if you want to just mess with someone's super scroll or something. You kind of make that feel a little bit less playable, more awkward, things like that. But still, players can deal. But it's just like one drop you can play if you want to play that kind of thing, right? If you're fighting into mirror matches, you can play Echo in that middle lane, and they can't play Miss Marvel in the same lane, right? So it does work in the mirrors pretty well. So that's just something to do. Next up, we have a little bit more Zabu-esque version where you get to play Zabu. So Zabu means you can play your 4-drops. So things like Jones, Miss Marvel, Iron Light are all playable. You still get the Storm. You still get the Fantastic Combo. You still get the Claw, Dr. Doom. You just have Orca here. Oh, you can't see it. I wonder if I was showing that. Okay, yeah, this one is fine. This one is mostly fine. Yeah. Okay, we do have Orca here just as a big drop. I think the card is okay right now. It's a 6/16, which is very decent in my opinion. So, if you're playing an only card, which is very easy to do with Miss Marvel and Claw, very easy to make it your only card, and then boom, you have like a 20 power lane with just Orca. So, pretty solid. Same. So if you could do something like Storm, Jessica Jones left lane, Miss Marvel middle, Orca right, and then bam, like that's not bad. So things like that is like not a crazy difficult thing to do and can work out. And I'm not even using Zabu or anything like that. So yeah. Next up we have High Evolutionary version. So the Hive is just a deck that can play this without too much issue. It's pretty easy to just have Miss Marvel and not worry. Like decks that play big things on 6 is really the best way to do it. When you're playing lots of small stuff on your final turn, then it's a lot harder to have unique costs. But if you're playing like a big Hulk, or you're playing like a Orca, or you're playing like a Doctor Doom, it's a lot easier to just have the lanes be equalized, or unique. So High Evolutionary does that, so it's kind of easier than normal to just kind of have a random Miss Marvel in there and do some work. Next up, we have the Destroy deck. So this is just a deck. I'm not a Destroy player, so I wouldn't fully trust my Destroy decks. However, it's just an idea, right? Like you get to play Venom, and that really lets you like solve some of the issues that you might run into if you're playing this and people are just like trying to debris you and all that nonsense, right? And then you get to still play Nimrod, so Shuri Nimrod into Venom is like very solid. Issue here, you can't go double Nimrod unless you don't care. Like you can if you kill a lane, right? You'll put a Nimrod in the middle lane, and you'll like end with a Venom, right? So the Venom will eat something, right? Blah blah blah. But like if you go like double eat, but you wouldn't go double eat middle, right? Because otherwise, or you wouldn't eat middle because otherwise you would turn off, or you'd eat your Miss Marvel, so that wouldn't work, right? But you could eat one lane. It's particularly fine. Anyways, I'm just saying you can play Nimrod if you want. You don't have to. I'm just saying it's an option. Obviously, I think if someone's gonna play a Destroy deck, it's probably not gonna look like this. I'm gonna be honest. I don't trust this deck, but I do think it's an idea, and that's the point here of this ideas. Yeah. And then the last one I believe that I have is Cerebro, of course. Cerebro 5. Of course we have Cerebro in there. Miss Marvel fits that Cerebro 5 very easily, and Doctor Doom is a great Cerebro 5 kind of piece, and you have the movement, you have whatever you need. So just if you like playing Cerebro, here's another tool for that Cerebro 5. We'll see how good it is. But overall, I have Galactus, right? This was a meme. Let's be honest. In case you want, you could like theoretically go Miss Marvel and then play Galactus. You did need ramp, right? Which is kind of something to be aware of, right? But you can definitely play Galactus in this, right? You get the Nimrod, you get the Goliath. Like it's playable. So this isn't like, it doesn't look that bad to me, to be fair. but it is something that should be mentioned. Galactus theoretically has a place with Miss Marvel. However, I'm not the biggest Galactus fan, but this one does seem playable. So you'll have to try yourselves and see. But once again, ideas, right? That's what we're doing here. But yeah, now we're at the end. Overall, my thoughts on Miss Marvel seems like a very cool card, but has a lot of constrictions. I do think in a lot of cases this will probably end up being a 410, which is not bad. However, you have to keep in mind that 5 power you're getting is probably not in the lane you care about, right? Because when you're playing Miss Marvel, you're probably caring about the middle lane, of course, and then you're probably caring about one of the left or right lanes, right? So you're probably not fully contesting all 3 lanes in a lot of cases, unless you're playing something like Onslaught or Omega Red or anything like that could just like easily affect all 3 lanes. But in a lot of cases, you're probably gonna fully invest in like 2 of those 3, and I think you're gonna get 5 power in one of those 3 lanes, but that 5 power might not be a lane you're actually contesting, where maybe you need to actually work a little bit harder in the lane that you're really working on, and that might make it so that it's not fully active, or your opponent is like messing up that particular lane since they know that's the one you care about. So could end up being better than I think, but my gut reaction is like, hey, you probably can skip this season. I don't really make follow-up videos for the season pass cards anymore because they don't do as well, and blah, blah, blah. But my initial thoughts is probably something you can skip. So we'll see if that is true. I just realized I did not change the outro video. The outro slides. No. Oh, man. I'm gonna... Okay, you know what? I will do some editing. And I will change the slides. How about that? All right, I'll see you in the next one. Take care and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Educatedcollins snap. Once you watch him, you won't go back. He'll teach you to marvel snap. Your skills will be